This is the Accounting Influencers podcast. Technology, is it going to be the death of accounting or is it going to be the savior of accounting? We've got somebody on the bleeding edge of technology. We're bringing him back for a second episode. He talked recently about the state of the profession, but he goes deep into tech today to talk about what the latest technology is and where it has been and where it's going. We're thrilled to have with us Steve Cox. Steve, is it the death or the savior of accounting technology?
Well, I definitely think it's going to be maybe not the savior, but it's certainly going to be the backup that a lot of accounting firms need and the driver of change for them, definitely.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. Technology's taking accounting on an interesting journey. It used to be paper and shoeboxes and pens and ledgers and quills and things like that. Then I guess the Excel spreadsheet was the first real disruptor. So just take us a little bit through the history of tech and bring us to, say, the last few years, and we'll set this up.
You've just named probably one of the biggest changes in the accounting world, which was Excel, right? Spreadsheets. Yeah. When those came along, it was like the Swiss Army knife to accountants. Suddenly, you could do all of these things you were doing paper in an Excel spreadsheet and through formulas and some really clever plugins, pretty much bend it to your will. And the fascinating bit is that a lot of firms are still doing that today because it is so flexible to be able to go and do what they want. Now, have spreadsheets really evolved over the last 10, 20, potentially even 30 years? Probably not. Maybe the fonts have changed, but the outputs really haven't massively changed. Why? Probably because the rest of the technology landscape has been building in the background to the point where it's got to now a real either emerging technology or it's become mainstream. And that's kind of where we're seeing a lot of change happening now. We saw a lot over the last few years of firms, and we talked about this already, of becoming digitized and then becoming truly digital. And I think now that some people have seen those leaders of industry with a kind of a digital adoption paving the way, but also talking about what they've done, the rest of the profession is kind of going, ooh, we should probably be looking at that as well.
Well, let's dig into this a little bit more. But first, I want to establish your credentials a little bit for the audience. You've been at Iris a long time, but you're morphing out of that and going into your own world with Concentric. Just tell our listeners, viewers, a little bit about your world and what you're doing.
Yeah, certainly. So been working at Iris for 22 years, man and boy, it feels like, and I've done a variety of roles at Iris, from working with accountants on how to support them with the software, through to building the software itself and being part of the business analyst team. I was Iris's CTO in the accountancy space in the UK for a year, senior product director for 7 years, had a lofty title of chief evangelist, which kind of leads into what I've been doing more recently around business intelligence, which is looking at what's going on in the respective markets and feeding that back to Iris to help with the strategy, but also feeding it back into the market to help drive the market forwards. And by market, accountants, bookkeepers, CPA firms. Yeah. How do we help to drive progress in those areas? That's driven a real bit of passion behind me. And with a brilliant agreement with Iris, they're allowing me to kind of spread my wings a little bit more and go and do some other bits. So Concentric is part of my own business around looking at all of this, pulling together the data. And under the ProTrends brand, we're actually looking at what's going on with some of these bigger firms, some of the larger firms, and helping others to understand what works, what doesn't. But importantly as well, helping to build out a bit of the shape and size of the profession so people can understand how many accounting firms are out there and where do they rank importantly within all of them.
Yeah. And the Accounting Influencers podcast is driven at accounting leaders and would-be leaders who want to make a difference in their firms. They want a voice, they want some authority, they're building their personal brand, they're building their influence, they're staying current and relevant. We're bringing the insights to them, the trends, the disruptors, bringing experts in to talk about them. And there's nothing more than technology that is disrupting accounting. We might add M&A and private equity in there is also disrupting accounting, but you're very much in the technology space. So take us back a couple of years to where technology was. You've got some stuff from Gartner to share with us, Steve.
Yeah, indeed. And anyone that's not looked at the Gartner reports, I really recommend you do. So they do a technology trends report generally at the beginning of each year. So the first one I kind of want to pick out is they look at what they call an emerging technologies and trends impact radar. For those that are in the UK, it does. And for those that are in the UK, you'll probably look at it and go, well, that looks a bit like a dartboard, to be honest. But it's an important one because It's looking at all of those different technologies from 4 different aspects and where they are in their range, for in other words, from a point of view of how far out from being mainstream, and as you get closer to the center, it's becoming more mainstream. So in 2023, Gartner included a load of different technologies, and the ones that I've highlighted on that our viewers can see on screen at the moment are the ones that are the important ones. So I'm just going to talk through for those that are listening rather than watching. A lot of them are focused on AI. So you've got responsible AI, which was, from Gartner's point of view, 5 to 7 years away from kind of becoming mainstream. Human-centered AI, similar there. And what do we mean by human-centered? I like to think of it as it's very much a case of you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between an AI and a human AI, because actually it's got all of the 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 mannerisms, but also it's a focus point of not just giving an answer, it's an engaging piece. One of the other ones that they've got in there, they call it a critical enabler, which they're saying is within 1 to 3 years is blockchain. So this is the technology of the distributed ledger, the one that powers all of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. I'd argue that in the accounting profession, that's probably a longer tail piece. It's probably 8 years or beyond. Why?
Okay.
The main reason for that is because everybody's got to be on the same technology stack to really leverage blockchain. But then there are a couple of other areas as well. So one is digital humans, AI avatars. They call this the smart world, which they're saying is around kind of like 8 years, maybe 6 at the earliest, from becoming mainstream. Now, I'll challenge that again in a minute. The other two are then generative AI, ChatGPT or others, and intelligent applications that are using this kind of tech and are connected to others. They're saying that's around 3 to 5, maybe a bit more than that, actually, maybe a bit shorter. But they're saying these are all the ones that just over, 18 months ago, they were saying these were the emerging technologies. Now, those ones I've specifically just called out are ones that we had seen last year, professional firms, accounting firms, CPA firms, starting to play with. And so they were very much emerging in the accounting space.
So if we look at the radar for 2024, and they say if you want to know what the future is going to be like, look at the past, look at history,
Exactly.
and how fast things are evolving. We know the fast pace of change with technology. So just talk us through the 2024 dartboard or targets, if you like, here, because it's fascinating.
Well, we'll come back to blockchain, because that, for me, is one of the really interesting ones. If you compare 2023 to 2024, blockchain was solidly in 2023 within the 1 to 3 years. So Gartner thought, as an emerging technology moving to the mainstream, 1 to 3 years time, it was bang in the middle. Let's say it was 2 years. You look at the 2024 one, and it's on the outskirts of the 1 to 3 years. They've pushed it back. Okay. So actually a lower adoption is one of the big things there. The others have all really kind of gone more in center. They've got better with their aim in some regards with their darts. Generative AI, human-centered AI, responsible AI, and intelligent applications have all moved into the kind of the 1 to 3 year space, or with generative AI into the 0 to 1 year space, where it's becoming really prevalent and where people are using it more in the mainstream. So I would suggest that even between just 2023 and 2024, these ones that are mainly powered by AI have seen a faster acceleration as an emerging trend, is the way that Gartner are looking at that. And we look at it in the accounting profession, we can definitely see examples of that. Most vendors are going out there and using generative AI in some of their solutions, but accountants are being really quite clever and innovative and are looking at going and building their own things with these.
Not just that, Steve, but accountants as individuals, as productive knowledge workers, they are using ChatGPT and things like that personally, aren't they, to fast track some of the processes and boring things that they're doing. So they're adopting it on an individual level.
Very, very much so. And I think it's, I can't remember who said it, but enough people in the industry have all agreed with it, that when AI first came out and generative AI and ChatGPT, people were like, oh, it's going to be the death of the accounting profession. Mm-hmm. Goodbye, accountants. Goodbye, bookkeepers.
Yeah, AI can pass CPA exams and chartered accounting exams.
It's interesting, right? Because you dig into how that actually worked and you realize how much it had to be fed the answer, the questions, to give a specific answer. So, but yes, did it do it? Yeah. But was a human behind it driving it all? Of course it was. But the bit for me is that it's not going to be AI that replaces accountants. My view is very much a case of an accountant using AI is going to replace an accountant who's not. And that's part of evolution, right? It's always the way that as someone who uses the newer, latest, evolved tool, they're going to outdate the processor. So it's all around how do you continue to evolve on that? And we are seeing that very much so that the to your point, people are using it in their personal lives. I mean, we've just seen Apple just launch the Apple Intelligence, great use of the AI term, within all of their devices. And that's just come across to the UK recently. That now means we're going to have more AI at our fingertips than ever. They're going to be using that not just for their personal lives, but also for their professional stuff because it's embedded in everything that they're using. Microsoft with Copilot, big drive on that as well. So the underlying platforms that pretty much everybody in the globe uses now have AI embedded within them.
And when we look at these trends, these drivers, these technologies that are being pushed out, we think they're on the edge of our fingertips and on the edge of widespread adoption, but the world is changing so fast. What else hasn't happened as fast as we thought it might do?
Well, the one that Gartner think hasn't happened as fast is around the AI avatars. Let me just quickly explain what they are. It's like a digital clone of yourself.
Okay.
Imagine that, Rob. Multiple versions of you and me going across doing multiple podcasts.
What a joy that would be. Just as an aside, Steve, I was in church recently and our pastor said to us doing a sermon, he said, imagine if church was full of everybody like you. And my first thought was that would be amazing because things would get done. People would be very direct. They would communicate really clearly. And then I thought, well, who's going to be in the band and who's going to look after all the kids' work and who's going to do the teas and coffees and who's going to do the prayer and the pastoral stuff? And I thought you're going to need a lot of people that are not Rob Brown. So I really take your point. AI avatars.
It's the whole AI avatars. From a Gartner point of view, they're looking at this quite broadly and they're saying that they've not seen as much of an adoption as they thought would.
Right.
And part of it, I genuinely believe, is around people don't realize what it can go and do, the potential for it. Let's turn it to the accounting industry. The moment the managing partners, the knowledge experts within firms, realize they can go and create a digital clone of themselves that can go and answer, let's say, the simple things that they would normally charge for,
wow.
The little light bulb's going to go on and go, hang on, if I've got 3, 4, 5 versions of me, that's all chargeable time, right? That's the way we work. So suddenly you could look at virtual bots that can go and drive all of these, but powered by the knowledge that these managing partners have got.
Yeah. Steve, I'm fascinated by the hype around AI because everyone's talking about it. So you think it's here and it's massive and it's widely adopted. We don't know to what degree it is in the accounting world. You spoke a little bit in the last episode about the digitized firms and the fully digital firms and the analog firms. Fascinating episode, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But when we talk about the hype cycle, this is a thing, isn't it? So explain this to us.
So again, great piece of research that comes from Gartner, and they look at all of those, so those emerging technologies and the ones that are already out there, and they go, right, how much is it being talked about? How much is it being used? And it's a curve that's been used for many, many years that says when technology emerges, people start to jump on board with it and the expectations start to grow massively. And you start to see that coming as a peak, of which it goes through this innovation curve into like a peak of what they call inflated expectations. Why is it called inflated? Because most things, it will burst and it will drop back down. So suddenly people go, oh, this is great. Generation AI, fantastic. Chat GPT. It can't do everything I expected. Oh, and then what happens is it drops down in its expectations into what they call the trough of disillusionment, which I love as a term. You don't want to have a piece of technology in there, right? And so what people do is they then try and go, well, let me re-educate you around how this technology can be used. Let me reset expectations. And this, what they call the slope of enlightenment, starts to grow the expectations again until it plateaus off to saying, here's what it's really good at and here's how you can use it. So then it becomes into this plateau of productivity. So it's a real, the chart shows it, a real squiggle. Goes high to low to then back into a plateau. But when you start to plot where technologies are on that, it gets really quite interesting. 2023, and let's be honest, probably in 2024 as well, AI, generative AI, ChatGPT, and all of the other variations that have come out were at the massive peak of their hype. Accountants were using them left, right, and centre to go and see what they could do, to look at what parts of the business could they go and drive it. So it was a new shiny tool looking for a home. That's how I would describe it. And it was really at the peak. You couldn't not listen to a podcast. You couldn't read a piece of news or an article or go to an event where AI didn't feature.
when AI is so prevalent as it is, you do think, as you're saying, that it's everywhere. But we're doing what we did on the last episode. We're looking at 2023. We're looking at 2024. We're looking at the past to see if we can define the future. So if we look ahead and focus on AI, what do the 2024 stats tell us about the direction and pace of travel?
Well, one, it's fascinating. So in 2023, Gartner said that generative AI, ChatGPT, was going to be 5 to 10 years away from this plateau. So it's going to drop down and pick back up again.
Okay.
In a 1 year space, and we're talking 12 months, it's gone from being 5 to 10 years as a prediction, then going to 2 to 5 years. They've pretty much halved the time they think it will get to a plateau. And they're also starting to see the hype drop. So it's starting to go down the wrong side of that curve, going towards the trough of disillusionment, because a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon, looked at what it could go and do. The potential is there, but it hasn't found its home. It hasn't found what a lot call in the industry the silver bullet that's going to drive productivity through the roof. It's very much has a specific point that it can help with, rather than being able to help across the board for everything. So we've seen the expectation from Gartner to get to the plateau shorten, which is good. It means that we're going to get to a point where we can use it in our everyday. But actually, what we are seeing is the hype die down. We're starting to see now people realize it's not the silver bullet, and actually it needs further work to be able to get to where it needs to be.
This is fascinating. Give us a sense, Steve, of how accounting as a sector competes with other sectors, other industries. And is everyone further ahead than accounting in AI, or are they in the middle of the pack? Where are we?
It's a really interesting one, because for AI, we kind of have to have three ingredients. One is you've got to have the raw data. AI is powered by data, right?
Well, accountants have a lot of data, don't they? They're the guardians of data.
Massively so, right? You think about the amount of data touch points that they have for every single client, and then think about the variety of clients that they have, past, present as well, because as accountants, we hold a lot of data for 7 years because we need to have that historical piece. Huge amounts of data. So they've got the raw ingredients. We already know all of I suppose we would think of it as the equations. We know of all of the processes, which is, in some regards in AI, that's the large language models, right? It's all of those pieces that know the hypothesis to test and stuff like that. The set of rules, we know all of those. And then the third part of it is there a desire to improve? Well, yes. So accountants, CPAs, bookkeepers, they've got all three of the key elements that need to drive adoption of AI. So whilst we might not be building our own AIs, as a point of view of experimenting with it, accountants are actually quite far ahead in comparison to other industries, is the way I would look at it. And there was a piece of research done by Accenture back in 2023. And don't get me wrong, this wasn't just looking at accounting firms, it was looking at as broad brush, but I'd actually agree that this fits with what's been going on in the accounting profession. And those that are watching will be able to see the graph. I'll try and describe it for you. It's very much a scatter graph with a cross chart in the middle. So it's 4 quadrants, a bit like the old Boston Matrix in some regards, that is looking at the AI capabilities from low to high versus the AI foundational capabilities. And in some regards, you could say that those that are using it to build something else going high to low. 63% of those people that say they're doing something with AI are just experimenting with what's out there.
They're dabbling.
That's a great word. Toe in the water, right?
Yes.
Having a little play. That's what they're doing. Nearly 2/3 of people with AI are just testing the waters, dabbling.
Now we've said that to our listeners and watchers, Steve, that you've got to get on your surfboard and have a play in the waves. It is a big wave. It is coming. So you've got to get out there. You are going to fall off. But yeah, you dabble. You have a little play. You get used to it. You get a bit familiar. You don't want to be left behind by this.
Completely. And in some regards, clients are now starting to say, do you use AI in your practice? Has AI been used at all in doing this? Well, audit is a great example. It used to be a case of, well, why did you use AI in this? It feels now we've flipped that coin to be, why have you not used AI to go and get a true and fair view of all of the data? So there is that expectation is growing, which is why it's so important for
So we've got 63% that they're not quite mature in their AI strategies, and they've not got it weaved in or baked into their firms in any way. Who else have we got in this scatter graph?
Well, the rest of it is pretty evenly spread. So 13% are those that are the innovators that are taking stuff off the shelf and are finding new ways of working, utilizing the tech that's out there.
And are these, in accounting, Steve, are these the technology firms and software vendors that are driving change? It's coming from them, or are these the firms themselves that have been more innovative with AI?
Let's be honest, it's both. And this is what's fascinating about what AI is driving is it used to be the technology providers, the vendors were the ones leading the way with this. What we're now starting to see is actually there's an abundance of tech out there, and firm owners, practitioners, innovative, pathfinding firms are out there going, oh, I wonder whether that piece of tech could work in my practice. And they're doing that with AI. So it's coming from both, which is why I think we're seeing this innovation drive so quickly, because it's not just coming from one source, it's coming from both. Now, we said that was 13% of being the innovators taking the stuff off the shelf and utilizing it in new ways. There's the flip side of that, which is there's 12% out there who are building their own AIs. Now, this, for me, is a cataclysmic change, certainly in the accountancy profession, because accountants, by and large, are not techies. They're not coders. They're not developers. But the technology has moved on to such a place now that actually you can go and do this with no code. You don't need to be trained as a developer to do it. The AI technology stacks that come from like Amazon Web Services, from Microsoft, allow you to go and plug and play and build all these yourselves. And that's where 12% are building things that is specifically for a function they need to go and do.
And we've seen news with the Big Four, particularly. Obviously, they've got big budgets, but they are investing eye-watering amounts into AI. Right. And presumably these are the builders that you're talking about.
Very much so. And that those builders, I mean, you just mentioned the Big Four, they're spending billions of dollars into this, in research. And to be honest, they've been doing it for years. But where does that really put them? Are they AI builders, or are they moving from bottom right of this chart into the top right, which is where they're achieving? Now that, for me, that's your holy grail, your cash cow in some regards, where you've built a piece of AI, you can provide it to others, and it's got not just a niche use, it's got a wide use. And that's when it suddenly becomes these achievers who are now looking at it going, I've built this capability. It's really driving across multiple areas, not a niche. And that's where I see the Big Four trying to get to.
Yeah, I love the phrase on this graph. The 12% of achievers are companies that have differentiated AI strategies and the ability to operationalize for value.
Great. It's phenomenal, isn't it? But then only 12%. Such a small slice. And it'll be fascinating to see if they redo this research in another year or so to see which one of those quadrants grows and which shrinks.
Yeah. So, Steve, in this episode on technology and trends and what's coming up for 2025, we have focused quite a lot on AI because that seems to be the biggest disruptor at the moment. Just wrap this up for us with what the accounting leaders, would-be leaders need to take away from this episode to be more authoritative, more influential, more impactful in their role.
Yeah, so three things for me. So funny enough, two are going to be about AI, and then I'm going to give you one last little tidbit as well. One is that you do need to dip your toe in the water. For me, one of my predictions for 2025 is that those digital avatars are going to become more mainstream within the accounting profession when enough people realize that they can create these digital clones of themselves to go and do the work they don't want to go and do and still charge for it. That's going to be quite an eye-opener for a lot of firms. The only way you can do that, though, by getting used to it. Start dipping your toe in the water. Become one of those AI experimenters to go and play with it. So that's the first thing I would say is here's the glass half full view. Glass half empty? Well, actually, that generative AI is going to become less hypeful. We're going to talk about it less. Those that find a real kind of like niche for it will use it. But actually, unless they find their niche, they're not going to really use it. It'll just become something to go and edit a bit of text from a marketing point of view, rather than completing a tax return with it.
Yeah.
So it still requires firms to keep on with what's going on and keep that toe in the water and maybe wade out a little bit further into the AI ocean, because when someone does find how it works mainstream, then you need to be ready for it. But the third bit, and it's kind of linked a little bit to AI, but I would suggest that for 2025, what's going to happen? What's really the outcome of all of this was digitization. Digitization into becoming truly digital firms. And what's happening with those truly digital firms? They're getting acquired. We've seen this throughout 2024, and in fact, it started in 2023. firms are growing through inorganic and are growing because they're buying other firms, buying a lot of technology as a part of that. That I personally think that's going to continue. In my 22 years in the industry, this year feels like it's been the one with the most amount of activity. And it feels like that's going to continue into next year. And those that were at the beginning of that kind of acquisition cycle 3 to 5 years ago, in 2025, we'll see the first ones that were maybe backed by private equity that have gone through that technology transformation, go to flip and look at an exit or go for their second round of investment. And I think we'll see the first ones of those happen next year.
Steve, this is great. I just love you to touch on what our accountants are using AI for. You got a little bit of research from Carbon just to share with us.
Yeah, indeed. And Carbon's State of AI report that was done actually earlier this year talks very much around the what's really being done with AI and where are the areas that they're using it, rather than just dabbling. There must be a purpose for it. The lion's share, 59% of people who responded to the survey said, well, they were using it for communications. So chatbots to help fine-tune some of what they were doing with their marketing. So, to be honest, accountants aren't marketeers. If you can type something into ChatGPT, then makes it look like you've been a marketeer for years, you're going to go ahead with it. And how do you get a clearer communication between clients and yourselves? That's where they've been focusing on how AI is. So in some regards, it's almost greasing the wheels a little bit more to help these things flow better. A third of people that responded said that they were using it for task automation. So integration and automation has been around 4 years. And I would personally say Iris has been at the forefront of a lot of the automation for years. AI is kind of putting automation on steroids, because what it's allowing people to do is, rather than just plugging two sets of data or two actions together, it's now allowing you to almost do well, once this happens, do this and then do this. Or if it's this, then you go down this route. So it suddenly allows a bit more critical thinking within the automation. And that's how AI is helping that. The bit that's quite fascinating, though, is that just under a third of people, so 31%, are using AI for research. Now, the reason why I say this is interesting, we've all probably played with ChatGPT, and you can go and ask it a load of questions, and it's only as good as the data it's been provided. So people are utilizing the latest versions of ChatGPT, GPT-4 and OpenAI to go and understand things they didn't know before, to help them to answer some of these questions, those bigger expectations we talked about in a previous episode that's coming from clients, to be able to go and say, oh God, I don't know about that. Let me go look it up. So it was a point where people would go to Google to go and find the answer. Prior to that, they probably would have asked a colleague. The newer generations as such, so Generation Z, they're probably going to go look for a video on it on TikTok or something like that. But what we're starting to see is this emerging trend that people are going and asking AI, going and asking the chatbots, the ChatGPTs for an answer. And the reason why I said this was quite interesting is you have to be very cautious about the responses that you're getting. And this, I think, is why it's only a third and not more, because there's a whole concept around AI, around it kind of making things up and illusionment, where you can ask it a question and it will give you an answer that sounds really authoritative. But if you then go and fact check it, it might not be 100% right. Yeah. I think that's to the point we were making earlier. That's why generative AI is starting to go down towards that trough of disillusionment, because it doesn't have all the answers.
And accountants need to be 100% right. They are in the business of mitigating risk, aren't they?
Well, let's be honest. If you really peel back all the layers of the onion, what are an accountant for?
Yeah.
They're to keep people out of jail. Let's be honest.
So there's some compliance stuff in here. There's some room for advisory in here, Steve, isn't there too?
Massively so. And I think if we were to say, where could that silver bullet from AI come from? Potentially it's around a combination of these. Research into areas that's the unknown at the moment for an accountant, which could be the advisory bit, to help them to then automate off the back of some of the data they've got to generate some of the advisory pieces that they can do. But also if they can then market that proactively through AI to their client base, well, then suddenly they're going to change from just being compliance driven to then becoming a proactive advisor.
Steve, we asked at the top of the show whether technology was the savior or the death of accounting. You've been very bullish about where technology can take this profession, this industry, and particularly AI. Leave us with some hope for 2025 and beyond for the accounting leaders and the tech ecosystem that surrounds them.
Yeah, and I've not set out to scare anybody with the amount of technology. And why do I still see it as a really positive piece? Well, let's be honest, when you go back through history, and past does give us an indication of what's going on with the future, every time a new piece of technology, a new piece of automation has come in, or a government have gone down a digital route to ultimately push accountants out of the way, what's happened? The accountants have evolved. The accountants have evolved around the technology and new processes to find a new way of getting closer to their clients and helping them. All of the technology we've just talked about on this podcast will help an accountant to get closer to their clients and help to automate what they do today to drive for an even brighter future over the next few years.
Amen to that. What a call to arms. Accountants have to evolve, and they're doing it very well by and large. And we encourage you as a viewer, audience of the Accounting Influencers podcast to keep evolving, stay current, stay relevant, keep having a voice. Otherwise, you will fall by the wayside, and we don't want that for you. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode of the Accounting Influencers podcast.